Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast with your host, Jerry Rogers.
The Business of America. You know what we do here. You know the ethos. It is the men, the women in the arena doing the hard work, the innovating, the science, the entrepreneur activity, the producing the energy we need to make our economy run, our lives run. And today we have a very special guest, and I appreciate his time. He is the president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, Tim Stewart. Tim, I'm not going to give a big intro. I usually spend too much time talking and not enough time listening. Why don't you tell our viewership and our listeners about the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, but also about yourself? It's, you're the president, and I said this to you off mic. You have been one of the most responsive gentlemen, leaders in the D.C. area in terms of your time and back and forth, and I value that. And I know you're busy, so tell our listeners who you are.
Hey, Jerry, it's great to be with you. Thanks, and I appreciate that that responsiveness. I take that as a great compliment. I really do. One of the reasons why is because U.S. Oil and Gas Association, which is the nation's oldest oil and gas industry trade association, going all the way back to 1917. It used to be called the Mid-Continent Trade Oil and Gas Association. We've been around a long time, and I've been at the helm for about 4 years now. And it's been interesting is because I've been in the industry, but I come from outside. I had a Capitol Hill career, and I've done 20 years of consulting and lobbying on behalf of interests all across the spectrum, from the left to the right. And it's been interesting. I've always taken a look at our industry, and I realize how sometimes poor our messaging is. And part of the reason why is I think the trade association world is very calcified. It runs on a committee structure. It's fairly layered. And when I took over the helm at U.S. Oil and Gas Association, I said to the board, look, I'll do this, you guys, but you got to let me do what needs to be done, which is we got to change the way we message. So I'm glad to hear you say we're responsive. I really appreciate that, because that's exactly what we need to do. A little bit about myself real quick. I grew up on a dairy farm, the youngest of 10 kids in southeast Idaho. My dad was a career Air Force pilot, always wanted to be a dairyman. When I was freshly married and fresh out of college, my wife and I moved back here, and I worked on the House side, and she worked on I worked on the Senate side, she worked on the House side, and then I finished my Hill career as a chief of staff on the House Natural Resources Committee, and then I hung out a shingle and have been working with the industry for the last 20 years. And so I used to be somebody back when I was younger. I used to be somebody, and now I'm just a guy working away for the oil and gas guys. So.
But you say something that makes so much sense that we, I think, take it for granted, and that is the importance of messaging. I do a lot of work with third-party organizations, those who fly into D.C. or state capitals, and they want to take their message to a member of Congress or to a regulator, to an administrative organization, and they always start with the facts. Here are the facts. And again, this is cliche, but true. No one cares about what you know until they know that you care.
That's true.
And I think that the oil and gas industry has done so much good. And I'm not saying this because you're on the program. If you go back to Real Clear Politics and Real Clear Policy, and you look at my writings and my own commentary, this is an industry of angels in a sense. What industry, what set of innovators have lifted more people out of poverty? And one thing also that we take for granted, besides messaging and putting forward the fact that we care about things, is how good modernity, technology, driven by energy, is good for the environment. So talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about how you're changing the messaging.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you're exactly right. Look, there's 6,000 consumer products that we use every single day that have oil or natural gas as the base ingredient for that. And that's everything from brushing my teeth in the morning with my toothbrush to the ibuprofen I'm going to take after this program. It is everywhere. And it has made our life immeasurably better. And the problem is you get in this public debate, and it's always about gasoline prices, or it's always about emissions. And it's not about what are the other scalable things that happen that make our life immeasurably better, that make it so we can worry about things like emissions and gasoline prices. It's really interesting. But we live in an environment, particularly in Washington, D.C., where energy policy has changed so much. It really is. It's a battle of ideology and dogma now than it used to be. When I started way back when, Jerry, energy, particularly oil and gas, used to be regional in its debate, and so when I started on Capitol Hill and when I was running a bill through the committee, like I just mentioned, I had 25 or 30 Democrats who were oil and gas Democrats that would offset the 25 Northeast Republicans who would never vote for me on an oil and gas issue. And that's all changed. I mean, and the hardest thing for me is it has become this ideological, dogmatic debate where you're either with the one side or against one side. That makes no sense, because when you get to that point, you then begin to pick winners and losers. You pick technologies that are theoretically better than others, and the result is we start to slide back. And for the first time in probably our life that we see, energy poverty is now a real issue to millions of Americans, and it didn't used to be that way. And frankly, it doesn't have to be that way. And that's one thing that I'm trying to change the message of, which is we've got to end energy poverty. We've got to end it now. And the way to do that is to produce more of everything.
Again, you make a brilliant point insofar as politics has become religion for too many. It's no longer about getting part of the loaf or being at the table or making compromises. Again, I'm old enough to remember when Democrats and Republicans actually compromised and made legislation. Yeah. When I first came to D.C., I spent as much time with Democrat friends as I did with Republican friends, and no one was scandalized by that. And I do think you're right. Energy policy, health policy. You think of biosims and pharmaceutical issues. It's all become ideological. Trade is now ideological, as opposed to let's see what's best for the American worker and the American industries. I'm going to ask you this question only because you said this. I mean, how are you about the future in terms of the public discourse? Are you optimistic? Are you despairing? Somewhere in the middle, because we have to get back to making good policy and not scoring points, so to speak, with our political base.
Yeah, I again, it depends on what time of day, honestly.
Yes. Well, I'm a despairing optimist. Yeah. I take both.
Yeah. It's like, how recently have I been doom scrolling, right? But the reality is let me take it back context 3 years ago. It's really interesting because in the past, my industry would be beaten up in a high energy price environment. We would have been beaten up and said, "Oh, big oil's price gouging, et cetera, et cetera." And that was always the game plan. It was, well, we'll beat up on big oil, and big oil will say we're sorry, and then the market will regulate itself. Really interesting in this administration that we didn't see in past administrations is on day one, they literally linked themselves at the hip with a series of actions that then had consequences with regards to energy policy and energy prices. The canceling the Keystone XL, or more importantly, canceling the federal leasing program for all intents and purposes. What that did more than anything, Jerry, I saw this is that it began to cement in the public's mind that there is a particular administrative action that then led to a consequence of higher energy prices. And for the first time in my 30 years in doing energy politics and policy, the public wasn't buying that big oil argument anymore. They began to say, no. The fact of the matter is we blame the high energy prices and the releasing of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and they stitched all this stuff together. And that, I think, has insulated our industry a little bit. And then it merged to this other issue of this invasion of privacy, particularly on things like gas stoves and furnaces.
Yes.
Where the administration and its NGO groups would come into your house and mine and look at you and say, you know what? You're a bad person because you made pasta using natural gas last night. And people took that publicly. That they took affront at that. That was an invasion of their privacy. It was none of your business how I'm making my dinner for my family, and get out of my kitchen. And that's changed the sort of the messaging a bit. And so that's what gives me a sense of optimism going forward. I think the election, whatever happens, I think we've been able to break that fever on it's an either or. And I think the public and the voters are going to say, we want more of all of the above. We want it to be affordable. We want it to be accessible. That gives me a little bit of hope. So I'm going to be a wary optimist. How about that? That's all
I like it. And I also like what you just said, and that is, who's against all of the above, right? If we could develop technologies that actually produce the needed energy, like renewables, I don't think anyone's opposed to that. But you said something early. It's when you begin to engage in crony capitalism, corporatism, when the government begins to decide this is a favorable industry, we're going to give it breaks and we're going to give it subsidies, and this is a bad industry and we're going to punish it. I think you're right. The American people, for the first time in a long time, are making these connections better. And I had a mentor years ago at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, Fred Smith. And Fred Smith had a communications strategy where he would say that people in politics are stupid. He didn't mean stupid, but like they don't know what's going on because they're smart. They're concentrating on things that can make a difference. And I think the energy issue has hit home, literally, where people are saying, on a hot day, it's, here in D.C., it's in the 90s this week. And I think people are looking at their thermostat saying, you know what? Leave it at 74. Don't put it to 72. Or in the winter that we just came out of, a lot of folks were wearing sweaters and they realized, my goodness, energy policy is not just this thing happens in D.C., but it's impacting my family.
Right.
And that's it. When you make politics personal like that, people begin to think differently. And and we're seeing that with oil and gas. I want to throw something at you because, politicians are politicians. They're always lagging indicators, right? They're always a little bit behind everything else, right? You make it safe for them. I used to work at think tanks, and I used to say that our job in the ideas factories were to make it safe for politicians to do the right thing. They're lagging indicators, right? And so when it comes to energy, though, and you have the Governor Newsom's, the Governor Wes Moore's, Wes Moore's a popular governor. He's well liked in the state. He's an Army veteran, combat veteran, so I'm not questioning his character, but he's made a big deal of net zero, of zero, a Maryland future, zero carbon emissions, or I'm sorry, a fossil fuel free future. And my response, I do some radio at work in the Baltimore City, and my response to the governor has always been, but Governor, what's that going to do to housing costs? What's that going to do to the cost of healthcare and access to healthcare? And I think people are beginning to understand the connection. You said it, 6,000 products. The connection between energy and fossil fuel energy and innovation and healthcare and building construction. And also, they're beginning to see it, I think, in terms of, well, the elites are after us. So, okay, I can't have a gas stove to feed my family, but your friends who own this fancy restaurant get a carve out, and they can keep their gas stove. Do you see that? Are we seeing a little bit of, it's like the elites versus the working class when it comes to energy?
Okay, so that's really what it's come down to be honest with you. You hit the nail on the head there. So there's a little bit to unpack there. Let me try and touch a couple of those points.
I warned you I talk a lot. I apologize.
So let the record show, Jerry, that the president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association bought an electric vehicle for his family 2 years ago, primarily as an experiment to see if it worked or not. And it's been a horribly miserable experience to the point where I don't drive it anymore. My wife drives it. Okay. And it's elite versus everybody else. It's this elite level of thinking versus the rest of us who have to actually solve the problem that the elites are trying to push on us. But here's a good example. So I live in Utah and I commute to Washington D.C. each week. Okay. We left Virginia after 30 years during COVID when Virginia lost its mind and we had to go out someplace where our kids could go to school. And I came up with this idea, like, hey, wouldn't it be a great idea if I bought an electric vehicle, not a Tesla? There's a difference because there's Teslas and then there's EVs. Okay, I will say that right now. What if we bought an electric vehicle and I drove it to the airport each week, back and forth, and I flew back and forth, and I'd say, look, here's my experience. It's 80 miles from my garage door to the Salt Lake City airport, okay? I go over a mountain range, and it's winter in Utah 7 months out of the year. So what I found almost immediately was this. Two things. One, we went to buy the car. The tax credit expired the day before, so I got no tax credit for buying it. Okay, it was manufactured in Germany. It's a Volkswagen. I said to the dealer, who was not prepared to be selling EVs, "Where is the charger that comes with this thing for the home?" It was supposed to come with one, and the dealer said, "Well, we don't have one." And I said, "Well, how am I supposed to charge this thing?" And the dealer said, "Well, I guess you could bring it here." Well, where are the people who were buying these things? Where do they get their chargers? And the dealer says, well, some of them are buying off of Amazon. So I had to buy my charger off of Amazon, rewire my garage to 240. And then the electrician who's rewiring my garage looks up at the transformer on the telephone pole in front of my house and says, by the way, that transformer's too small. Don't run your dishwasher when you're charging your car.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. That goes to an infrastructure problem.
Sure.
Which is, none of us in my neighborhood could have more than, my neighbor's got a Tesla, but none of us can be charging electric vehicles all at the same time because the system can't absorb it. I also learned, unfortunately, that you lose 30% of your range when you drive over the mountain, and when it's cold, you lose another 20% of your range. And so the fact of the matter is I can't get from my house to the Salt Lake airport on a single charge. So it's been a disaster, right? But yet this was an idea that was put in place in the IRA bill when they said, look, well, isn't this great? Everybody's going to do this. It doesn't work. It may work in the Delmarva here in the D.C. region. It may work on the east and the west coast, but it does not work in middle America. My wife and my kids and I just drove across country last week, left Utah, got to Virginia. We did not take the EV because we didn't want to take 5 days to do it. But we did find gas anywhere we needed to.
Sure.
So that's kind of my experience. And it goes to this point of Washington has this tendency to your point of politicians being lagging indicators. They're always a solution in search of a problem. And you see that across the board on everything, right?
Yes. Yes and amen. Yes.
In energy in particular, they are chasing a problem that was already resolved when we switched from coal to natural gas in electric generation. We dropped our emissions 60%, and that happened a year before they passed the IRA bill.
Right.
That's where we're at. And so my industry, look, we're big fans of, you cannot have a baseload power that is weather dependent. So we're big fans of nuclear because natural gas will be the bridge fuel to get us to nuclear. And at the same time, everybody's got to be, you've got to shift out massive fleets if you want to get to EVs, and your contractor that you mentioned, the guys building houses, don't want to do that. So we got a long ways ahead of us. That was a really long answer. Sorry.
No, but again, these are complex issues, and I hate to say that, but it's true. There's nuance and complexity to it, and I think what your example of driving and going through the mountains in your family and the don't run the dishwasher.
Yeah.
That should be a title of a commentary piece. Don't run the dishwasher.
Don't run the dishwasher.
But what you just did was you made some complex issues very conversational. The fact is that I'm in favor of innovation. That's the ethos of this show, to bring the innovators in and the men and women who build this country. But the fact of the matter is we're not there yet.
Right.
And so what we're doing is we're giving subsidies and we're giving government blessings and the government is pushing technologies that aren't there yet.
Right.
They might get there, but their interference might also hold back the technology.
Yeah, California is a perfect example. I don't know if you saw this 2 days ago, but the legislature mandated diesel or locomotive trains that don't exist yet to be put in place in the next 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't do that. My industry is probably one of the most innovative. That's a fascinating thing about the oil and gas industry. I can hold up my phone and you can hold up yours, and it's largely the same piece of equipment that it was 15 years ago, when the iPhone was. The software is a little bit different. But I was in Duncan, Oklahoma 2 or 3 weeks ago with Halliburton, who is one of the largest service providers for the oil and gas industry, the ones who actually drill the wells. The rate of innovation that Halliburton has and the rate of adoption of new technologies is every 3 to 5 years. We're fracking very differently now than we were 10 years ago. We're bringing oil and gas out of the ground and into the market in a very, very different way than we were even 5 years ago, you know? And so the rate of innovative change in my industry is fascinating. I can't keep up with it. What I find is I'm talking about stuff that's already 7 years old, and I get corrected by some of my companies saying, well, by the way, we've moved beyond, you know? And it's a fascinating thing. I'm just proud to be part of it, to be honest. It's a really cool thing.
You started the program off by talking about the importance of telling a story. And what I find in this debate, and you cannot separate climate, environment, energy. These things are connected. They're connected because they ought to be, also because politically and ideologically we connect them. But what bothers me about this debate, I don't mind having the argument. In fact, I love the argument. My life is about the argument, spirited yet civil. But it seems to me that some on the other side, to the extent there's an other side here, those who are pushing the solutions in the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, the fact that they've put in tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars for charging stations that were never built. I mean, there's lots of problems. But what bothers me the most, I want to ask you to comment on this, is there's a lot of half-truths. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of narrative over the facts and the truth. And your industry gets a lot of black eyes, a lot of these folks are evil. This industry is a pariah. We ought to force them to pay their fair share for the environment. And how do you push back? It's easy it's not easy. It's fair, fact versus fact, right? Right. Let's have this argument, best policy. But how do you push back against someone who's not telling the truth about your industry?
Well, that's welcome to my world. That's the hardest part.
I know I want to solve this.
So a good example happened to me yesterday. And we're pretty active on social media, primarily Twitter/X. That's what we are, because and we've got we're not huge, we've got a decent following. The irony of most of our followers are frankly middle-aged women from Texas and Oklahoma and Florida and other things. It's really interesting. But here's a good example. Okay, yesterday the governor of New York, there's a heat wave. Okay, yes. Where it's hot here on the East Coast, but at the same time, my brother's field of corn in Idaho froze on Tuesday night because it dropped below 32 degrees. Okay, we're not in an era of global bullying. But the governor of New York, Governor Hochul, yesterday said that we're now experiencing temperatures that none of us have seen of our lifetimes. That's fine if you go back to 2012. Well, that was the last time that reached 100 degrees in New York City, 12 years ago. Okay, but they say crap. They just throw it out, and my industry is really slow to respond. And the problem is when you're explaining, you're losing. You've been in politics.
Oh my goodness, yes,
And so we can sit down. Well, technically, the historic it goes back to 100 years, right? And people don't listen to that. But what I found is you can tongue in cheek and be humorous and call them on their lies or call them on their BS. And oftentimes you'll find it's amazing feedback loop where people will be able to agree with you on that. Best example I ever had was about 2 years ago, 4th of July. I'm sitting on my couch on a Sunday morning, and I open up Twitter, and there's Joe Biden's White House tweeting out saying something to the effect of, gasoline prices are too high, and gasoline and companies need to lower their prices now. And I responded back, just simply said, "Thank you, Mr. President. Please have the intern who wrote this."
I love that.
And that was sort of all of a sudden, boom, and that went viral. We've had a couple things go viral, and we're not being mean. We're just being straightforward, And the fact of the matter is that in this town, that to get along, there are no enemies. They're just friends and potential friends.
Yes.
And so in the IRA bill, when they're trying to promote the geothermal industry and the drilling technologies, and the irony is they have to come back to Halliburton to say, you guys are the best drillers we had. Can you help with us on the geothermal? And Halliburton says, yes, we can. Friends and potential friends. And that's how you have to kind of approach it. You don't have to be mean, but you have to be straightforward. You have to call them on their BS. That's how it is.
Well,
and my industry is kind of bad about that. I try and do better.
It's funny. let's speak the truth in the sense how our political discourse has changed. Donald Trump coming into discourse in 2015, 2016 to the present day has changed our public discourse. And so therefore, what I've decided, I do talk differently now. I do present arguments differently now than I did prior to Trump. And what I mean by that is that I didn't try to chase down every argument. I didn't try to chase down and correct every mistake or untruth put out by some in the political discourse. I try now, though, to do that more often. And right. I think you're brilliant, again, with the use of social media and using quips and trying to be not sarcastic, but funny, like make a point in a way that's kind of short, kind of like how Muhammad Ali would he sting you.
Or like a butterfly and sting like a bee.
Exactly right. Thank you very much. Yeah. And so, like little things like this. I know that. So when I do my programs and we do our live call-ins, I get Jerry, it's been the hottest month on record. And I'd be like, well, wait a second now. It turns out that May of 2024 was cooler than May of 1896. Right. And it was way cooler than May of 1934. Right. So my point is that is climate change real? Okay. But this idea that everything is warmer, everything is worse, everything is because of man's production and emissions, that we have to have a discussion over. And to your earlier point, we've become way too ideological there, where we can't even have a conversation about the science any longer. And this isn't just true in your industry, in energy. We saw it during COVID. We could not have a rational conversation about science. We stopped following the science and we started following the politicians. And you see where that got us. Yeah. And there's other examples of when we decide to stop following the science or the best policy and we follow the ideology. And it always gets us in trouble. But I do think energy's turning a corner. You're not there yet, of course, because there's lots to do and you're a target. Let me ask you this, and this was a question that I've asked. I've had the opportunity to sit with United States senators and sit with Chuck Schumer and I've asked the majority leader this question before. I said, why? And this is a private conversation, but I'm not betraying anything. I asked him once because he came after hard against the pharmaceutical industry. And I was working at a think tank at the time, and he noticed that I had a magazine from our think tank. He said, "Oh, I love your think tank, but you're in bed with the pharmaceutical companies," is what he said to me. And I said, Senator, I know how much money you get from the generics. I would never assume that you're voting for better policies for generic drugs because somehow they've bought you. I don't believe that. I think you think that generics are good for the market. They are good for the market. And this is my question to him. I said, doesn't it hurt all Americans when we attack our home-based innovative industries like pharma, like energy, like tech? It seems to me we're beaten up on our own, and I grew up in a family where around the table we could have a fight. But once you go outside, there's enough of that. The world sees our politicians beating up on your industry. Yeah. What does China take away from that? What do others take away from that constant criticism from politicians?
There's a really interesting article that cropped up last night on the Daily Wire, I think it was, where it showed that the U.S. which for a time was Europe's largest LNG supplier. That's now dropped, and natural gas supplier, and now that Russia's retaken that temporarily has retaken that crown. But if you go back 6 months, if you recall, the administration put a pause on LNG exports, which sends a message, because oil and gas is now a global commodity. And for the value of U.S. providing for globally, which is one where we're a stable trading partner and we can be trusted. But when you pull the rug out of your allies and you say, well, we're going to put a pause on LNG project, that takes away the trust and the reliability. And so you have to go find something for your immediate needs, which you got to keep the lights on. And that's where energy policy is it's evolving. It's really kind of frustrating from our perspective, is that we are the world's ultimate swing producer. Okay, we have insulated ourselves and a lot of our trading partners from the whims of OPEC because they can get energy from us. And that is a U.S. industry. That's just like the defense industry. It's just like the aircraft industry. It's just like everything else. Global automotive industry. We are the global leader. And our China and Russia are loving what's going on with this administration and energy policy because we're essentially giving up all of our leverage repeatedly and sending it over to there. Real quick, 24% of all the oil and gas assets in the United States are under federal lands and waters. That's the part that the administration can't control. And essentially for the last 3 years, we have yet to see the impact, but we will see over the next 3 years. When you slow down and stop a leasing program and you take 20% of your asset off the table, it has a big impact. And we're going to see that coming forward. What that means is our allies and our competitors are going, they're unilaterally nailing one foot to the floor and trying to have a fight with us. So, albeit, let's let them do it. I don't think we realize what a hole we're going to be in 2 years from now when it comes to our ability to produce here. The private lands are largely, we've maxed out those. We need the federal asset to be producing, and that's gone down.
So America's energy future. Last question. We're going to wrap things up. I know you have a busy day ahead of you. Is it bright? Is it just too many challenges? Somewhere in the middle? Will a different Congress and new administration be better partners? I mean, what's your synopsis?
That's the easiest question I'll get asked all day, which is never bet against this industry. I have lived through every single configuration of a Congress and administration. Every single one of them come in thinking that they are going to produce the new idea. The reality is our industry has been here and outlasted administration after administration and bad idea after bad idea. We produce what people need. They still want it. They're still asking for it. So don't bet against us. We'll work through what's left of the Biden administration and a Democratic Congress. We'll still be around because people need us. So that's my take.
Abundant, affordable energy. America's energy future is bright. You offer to us modernity, and I'd rather live in 2024 than 1850. And
exactly.
So I think moving forward is good. Listen,
we're not going to party like 1699.
Well, listen, as we're talking, there's so many other questions. We're going to have to maybe have a part 2, a part 3. I also want to make sure that your allies and your organization are in the pages of Real Clear Politics and making the argument. I know that you're going to you're going to publish soon the kind of energy contract for America, something similar to that.
Yeah, we've come up with this idea, which is, and it's not just oil and gas, it's everybody. It's our friends in the nuclear industry, coal, renewable, that we need more of all of the above. And our responsibility to the American people is to reduce energy poverty and make it affordable and accessible, like you just said. That's it. That's the plan. That's the energy contract. So state, local, and federal leaders, we want to work with you to stop making bad policy that pits us against each other, chooses one winner or the other, or continues to keep people in poverty. Let's let them not have to make that choice between food on the table and gas in the tank. That's my view. So
that's it. You know what? And that's, I had a guest once, I'm going to let you go. I had a guest once who said, you have 3 seconds to make an impression. And after that, if you don't make that impression, they don't listen to your argument. But you just said it, ending energy poverty. That's it.
That's what we do. Sense. We owe that to American people. So, hey,
Tim Stewart. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It was great to be with you. Thanks.
Tim Stewart, U.S. Oil and Gas Association, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association. This has been a great show. To the audience, thank you very much. This has been another edition of the Business of America. Thank you very much.
This has been the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast, hosted by Jerry Rogers. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream